So I thought I would go over some basics regarding BDSM. And this comes, I'm going to be reading from the book Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns, The Romance and Sexual Sorcery of Sadomasochism. And despite what the title says, this is not a religious book of any sort. Well, I guess it depends if you think that a sexual experience is equatable to a religious experience. But that aside, I highly recommend this book. It is one of the probably top books that covers just about everything you could possibly need to know about BDSM, advice on how to, do everything between understand the lingo, to advice on how to conduct yourself between dominants and submissives, as well as advice on how to tie a safe knot and do other restraints and such. And I'm not getting compensated for this plug, by the way. I just think it's a really good book. So I'm going to start with the term scene or scening, and this is from page 8 of the book. And I'll provide my own comments along the way. Scene. This word has two meanings. Number 1, the scene takes in the whole scope of the fetish community. Once you begin to interact with others of a similar bent, you have become part of the scene, and one of the scene people. Scene people often visit scene clubs, public places that charge for admission, such as Paddles or The Vault in New York. There are scene events, parties, and gala balls, fashion shows, and seminars. The Dressing for Pleasure Gala is an annual New York area event that incorporates all of these elements into a weekend-long frolic attended by hundreds of scene people from all over the world. Now, personally, I don't go to fetish clubs. This isn't a judgment against those that do. I'm just not that kind of exhibitionist. While I have absolutely no problem talking about BDSM and the things about it or the details or my experiences in a general sense, the actual participation in activities with my partner, I prefer to keep private. That's part of my private life. So, yeah, that's just me, though. That's not necessarily for anybody else. There are scene clubs with the structure of support groups, which is kind of like the club I ran in college. Though we didn't have activities to the extent of some of these actual clubs, we did more discussion and show and tell and how to make kinky toys on a budget because we were all starving college students. When you join the scene, you get to wear lots of funky clothes, hit people who will thank you for it, and toss moderation out the window. Also, under the guise of discretion and protecting the family name, you get to pick a scene name. Scene names frequently reflect inner fantasies. Female dominants seem uncommonly attracted to the names of goddesses. Diana, the Huntress, attracts a hell of a lot of namesakes. There's enough of them, in fact, to hold an annual Goddess Diana convention. There are a bunch of dukes and duchesses, counts, countesses, and countesses, marquises, marquises, kings and queens, generals, captains, sergeants, and of course, corporals. There's also the full range of deities and scores of literary figures. So, as a personal anecdote, I had a scene name briefly. This came from my first sort of introduction to BDSM, which was by way of the internet, of all things, back when chat rooms were the preferred method of communication on the internet. On IRC chat, I found myself at one point around the age of 19, accidentally, and I do mean accidentally, coming across a chat room that dealt with BDSM. I didn't understand the lingo, I didn't understand what they were talking about, but I knew they were talking about sexy stuff, and I was a horny teenager. One of the things that I did notice amongst the people in the chat room were that the men, or the dominants, all had signifiers in their screen names, like Sir or Mistress. The sirs and the mistresses got to use capital letters in their names, while all of the submissives were required to have their screen names be in all lowercase letters. As well, if a submissive was the property of a specific dom, they would put that dominant's initials in brackets at the end of their screen name to symbolize a collar with their initials on that collar. So you could see someone with the screen name lowercase puppy, bracket, MD bracket for Mistress Domina or whatever. These were the sort of cultural rules I learned about in a chat room setting. So I took on a screen name that had Sir in front of it, because I thought, well, that must mean what men use as their name in here. Not understanding that I was telling people by putting Sir there that I was a dominant, which at that point I wasn't. But I was approached in that way, and consequently, thanks to the wonderful powers of my ability to type and write clearly and in complete sentences, and my visual imagination, I was able to tell stories, effectively write personalized erotica for women and other submissives. And I quickly gained a reputation in this chat room amongst this community for being a very desirable dominant because I was so expressive and articulate. That is the first seedlings of my introduction to BDSM and becoming a dominant. I sort of learned the ways of doing it in my mind and imagination long before I ever did anything in real life. But moving on. The second definition of a scene, or doing a scene, means performing an erotic activity related to satisfying the perversions we hold most dear. Sessions qualifying as scenes can be as simple as a spanking leading to sex, or as elaborate as a weekend spent in 30 bondage positions, each with its own costume, setting, and script. Binding your lady and tossing her to stew for a while in a cage qualifies as a scene. Tortures such as root canal, elementary school concerts, and filing income tax returns, though excruciatingly painful, are a part of conventional behavior and are not considered scenes. So this is something that, clarification that I think is important, because a lot of stigma surrounds BDSM as torture and pain and abuse. If the activity is consensual, if it is done methodically, and it is done by way of communication, both verbal and nonverbal, before, during, and after the scene, it's not abuse. This is the misunderstanding I think a lot of people have about what constitutes a healthy power exchange relationship between a dominant and a submissive. And that is granted that pain or paddling or spanking of any kind is actually a part of your power exchange. It's not required. People think that it is, but it's not. A power exchange can constitute all types of things. For example, there can be something quite erotic about being instructed on what to eat on a particular day. It was my experience at one time to leave instructions for my submissive. Nothing too complicated, but like I would leave them an envelope and it would say, today you will wear this set of underwear, and for lunch you will have this sandwich. And when you get home, you will take off your panties and be ready for me when I arrive. Simple little instructions like that, without anything torturous, without anything actually physical taking place, can be satisfying to a submissive, and also very satisfying to a dominant. Knowing that someone is telling you what to do, taking that power out of your hands to make a decision, and instead you, as the submissive, extending that trust and giving over that power to the dominant, even in something as, well, painless as reading a note or following instructions, that can be just as arousing, if not more so on some levels, than being tied up and spanked. So, as far as scening is concerned, again, basically it's anything as far as are doing a scene, I guess I should say. It's anything where you're taking a part in an activity with someone or someones, if that's how it works for you, that is of an erotic, kinky, or fetish nature. That's about it. Now, you could play witness to a scene if you go to one of these sex clubs or bondage clubs, and there are, at many of these places, stations or stages in which people are performing, either sex acts or demonstrations of bondage or whatever. You could watch a scene, or a scene could simply be you and your partner in the privacy of your own home. Now, these terms are not required, necessarily, but if you're speaking to someone who is part of the lifestyle, or if you're trying to differentiate between simply having sex with someone versus having a kinky experience with someone, in conversation talking about a scene versus I slept with somebody can tell somebody a bit more about what you mean without having to go into further details. Of course, they'll probably want further details because that's just how kinky people are. Well, most of them. But that's enough of a brief little overview for now of that particular topic. I'm going to procedurally go through the book and pick out different terms or topics or activities that I can at least somewhat knowledgeably elaborate on. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If I can't answer it, I will attempt to find a source for you to consult. And as said previously, I really do recommend the book Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns. For lack of a better phrase, it is probably one of the better BDSM Bibles. The other book that you can look for that's also very good is called The Loving Dominant. And to the best of my knowledge, these two books are relatively available through Amazon and other booksellers. I don't think they are out of print. If I'm mistaken on that, I will leave a correction in the description. As always, thank you for listening.